Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, and welcome to Power BI Dev Camp. This is the Managing Power BI using the Power BI Admin API session. With us, as always, is our Dev Camp counselor, Ted Pattison. Ted, good morning. How's it going?
Oh, it's going real well. Very excited to talk about the Power BI Admin APIs. I brought some reinforcements with me. So we have Rick Zhu, who's a senior program manager and kind of works specifically on the Power BI Admin APIs. And he'll be answering questions and telling us a little at the end about the roadmap. So how are you today, Rick?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for introducing me. Hi, everyone. I'm looking forward to this wonderful webinar and answering questions if you have any.
With that, let's go ahead and get into our program. You know, as usual, I'm going to point out that we have a Power BI Dev Camp portal. If I, go over here and I jump to the portal, things that you'll like about the portal is for past webinars, being able to, go to these and basically go see all the details and have downloads for the sessions. If we look at today's session, which is our session 19, I wanted to point out that you can download the PowerPoint slides that I'm using, and I'm going to be showing a sample application. And maybe while we're here, just a teaser for next month, if you've been doing Power BI embedding with AppOwn's data, we have a brand new feature called Service Principal Profiles, and next month, that's what we're going to cover. Okay, great stuff. So let's go ahead and back to the show. As I mentioned, there is a sample C# console application that I'm going to use to kind of demo all of my code, and that is available for download. Something that you could just download, and as long as you create an Azure AD application and you have the right permissions to call the admin APIs, you'll be able to test this out. Okay, one more thing before we get started, and that is today's fun fact. It's Super Tuesday, and what that means is, you knew that. I mean, your inner Rain Man knew that, but 22222, and if you're on the East Coast with me, in about 20 minutes or so, we'll hit 222222 at 222. So just wanted to make sure everyone's excited about that. Okay, now as far as what we're going to cover today, we'll start with looking at the Power BI REST APIs. Okay, so let's go ahead and how do you call the Power BI REST APIs? So before we get into what to call, let's talk about how. So as a developer, if you work on a development platform that can issue HTTP requests and you're able to create JSON in the body and deal with JSON as a response, you can call any of the APIs from whatever developer tool that you use. If you're using .NET, there's this friendly layer on top of our API, which is the Power BI .NET SDK. That's the one I'm going to use in my sample. It just kind of abstracts away having to execute HTTP requests and deal with the JSON coming and going. And it just kind of creates a better programming style. Now, you can also use PowerShell scripts. Microsoft has a PowerShell library, Microsoft Power BI Management Commandlets. And by using that, once again, you could call any of the APIs we're going to look at today. And then finally, if you're over in Power Apps or Power Automate land, it's possible for you to be able to call any of these APIs if you're willing to create a custom connector. And I'm going to reference down there the YouTube session, back and I guess if I just take one more second to kind of go back here and look at our sessions, you'll see that the session 17, building solutions. So this kind of gets into a lot of details of how to call our REST API from Power Automate or Power Apps. Okay. Now, one other thing, if you're going to be going down this road, is that you get very familiar with the documentation, on this page right here, because this tells you about how to create the bodies, how to deal with the responses, of our API calls, and also, points out the limitations. Okay, now, first conceptual point here. We have to divide all the Power BI API operations into two categories. There are user APIs and there are admin APIs. And what's confusing is that if you're running as a service principal, which one can you call? And the answer is either of them. It has nothing to do with whether you're using a user or a service principal, as the identity that's executing the call. So when we talk about the user APIs, basically the user is required to be a member of the target workspace to be able to see or do any type of manipulation, on that workspace. So the user API cannot access workspaces in which the current caller is not a member, whether that's a service principal or a user. And the user APIs are frequently called by both users and service principals. So for instance, if you call the user API GetGroups, that will basically return the data for a set of workspaces in which the current user is a member. If there's workspaces and you're not a member, you're not going to see that come back. Now, when we get to the Power BI admin APIs, it doesn't really matter if you're a workspace member or not. The idea is that you're in charge of this Power BI environment, and you need to be able to see every workspace, in your current Power BI tenant, which is kind of the same thing as the Azure AD tenant and the Power BI tenant. I think of them as one and the same. But the idea is if you call GetGroupsAsAdmin, you're going to be able to find, any workspace, whether you're a member or not. Now, when we want to call the Power BI admin API as a user, you have to be in a special role. You have to be in the role of the Power BI administrator. And that's something that the Azure Active Directory team, that controls user accounts would have to put you in that. Note that if you're a global admin, you're automatically a Power BI administrator. Now, if you're creating access tokens and you're having those tokens such that you can call the admin APIs, with a user identity, you need to have either an access token with the delegated permissions of tenant read all or tenant read write all, depending on whether you want just read only access or read write. And note that if you try to acquire an access token for a user, and that user is not in the role of Power BI administrator, and you ask for tenant read all, it's basically going to fail because you can't get that particular delegated permission in an access token, unless you're a Power BI administrator. Okay, now how about I want to call the Power BI admin API as a service principal. So the current admin API support, is limited to read-only operations. So if you want to use the admin API to add a user to a workspace, unfortunately, that's not yet available in Service Principal. We're working toward that, but you have to use a user identity. Now, to configure Service Principals, you're going to create an Azure AD application. It's going to have an application ID. It's going to have, probably an application secret. But then what you have to do is, first of all, take that service principal or the Azure AD application and put it into an Azure AD group, and then have that group configured, under the tenant level setting, allow service principals to create and use Power BI. And I see that my slide is wrong there. It should be, the one above that, which is right here. You need the allow service principals to use Power BI APIs. So if you don't have, that association where your service principal, has this permission, any call to the Power BI REST API will fail. So once you do that, there is a second thing where either with the same Azure AD group, or we create a different one, this one called Power BI Admin Apps. If your service principal is added into that Azure AD group and you have this setting, now your service principal, is allowed to call the API. One final thing, when you create the access token for service principals, they never contain any permissions, whether it's delegated permissions or application permissions. The idea is your access token just tells Power BI who the service principal is. And by the settings, we can see whether, it's allowed to call the admin APIs or not. Okay, now let's get up and going with our first example. In a second, we're going to do most of our demoing with C#, but let's say that I want to do something with PowerShell. So PowerShell has a set of library commandlets, Microsoft Power BI Management, and it has a scope parameter. So if you set the scope parameter to individual, it calls the Power BI user API. If you set the scope parameter to organizational, it calls the Power BI Admin API. So let's look at this code here. If we look at the, very first line of code inside here, it says scope individual. So when I run this, it's going to call get groups and just give me back the workspaces where this user is a member. In the next one, I don't really include scope, so the default is scope individual. And down here at the bottom is where we're going to say scope organization. That's when we flip the switch. And instead of calling get groups, we call get groups as admin. And it could potentially return, every single workspace in our tenant. Okay. Now note that the way that you make, the operation called the admin APIs is to say scope organization. And the last point here is that some, but not all the commandlets in this library, support switching over and calling, the Power BI admin APIs. Okay. Now, here's an example of running that PowerShell script. Get Power BI workspace scope organization. And once again, you can run this script, as either a user with the potential, with the right permissions, or a service principal that's been configured to execute the admin APIs. And note that when you use the admin API, a workspace returns a type property that it doesn't return when you use the user APIs. And so if the type equals workspace, it is a V2 style app workspace. The older ones that are kind of going away is if type equals group, that's a V1 workspace. And then we have personal group as well. Okay, so what we're going to do for the rest of the session, is look at some code samples in C#, in this particular sample application. Okay, let's see. There are a couple questions. Any questions that we should get at? Okay, I see.
There's one question about how to get around the limit of calling the APIs to get workspaces.
Okay, so I know how to answer this question, and that is that this user is going to have to wait to section number 4 when we talk about scanning workspaces. Yeah, so we're going to get to that. So it'll be a little premature to answer that right now. Okay, definitely we'll go into details there. Other questions? Okay, well, let's keep going. Rick, you can feel free to interrupt me if there's questions that come in.
Will do.
Now, let's go ahead and start with, what many of us want to do, and that is to discover what we have, inside of our current Power BI tenant. So you can call GetGroupsAsAdmin. Now note that when you use the admin API, that it goes through the admin endpoint. You can see that right in the URL. Also note, that when you call the user API, how many workspaces might you be a member of? 10, 100, The limit of workspaces you can be a member of as a user or a service principal is 1,000. So we can kind of assume that calling get groups, doesn't return a runaway amount of items. However, what if you're calling get groups as admin and you're in a huge enterprise organization, that has 20,000 workspaces? So what you'll see is that we require that you use the $top parameter, to specify how many workspaces should be returned, and also, make use of the filter parameter to look at the type. And if we say type equals workspace, I just want to see V2 workspaces. And if we say state equals active, I'm basically saying only show me the workspaces that are active. Do not show me the workspaces that have been deleted and are kind of in that in-between state before being deleted. Now, here's an example of our first piece of C# code. And so note that with the Power BI.NET SDK, I can call Power BI.client.groups, get groups as admin, and now we're going to go ahead and pass the top 100, and we're going to pass that filter inside there, and we're going to get the values back. If I go back here, let's go back to our sample application, and inside of our sample application right here, what's going to happen here is that I have a program, and this is for you to take the code, use it any way you want. So here I want to call get workspaces as admin right here. Let me go ahead and we're going to run demo 1. We're going to run this right here, and note that as I run this, one of the things that you might like to do, as a developer, is kind of spy on what's going on behind the scenes, such that if I come back here and kind of take a look, I can see the URL of the request going in, I can see the different things that I'm passing, and then we can also see the JSON result. Now, inside of the demo, what I wanted to do is just kind of give you a real quick way to kind of see what the API returns back to you. So what we have here is every time I run one of these methods, it's going to basically just take the JSON that comes back and, add it into a file. If I come back here and we say get workspaces as admin, what we could see here is that, it just returns a list of these workspaces and, here's the data you get back. Okay, now what I want to do now is kind of go through some of the, calls that you're going to make. So the first thing to note is that as you call GetGroupsAsAdmin, you can add an expand parameter and say, I don't want to just see the workspace, but I'd like, the API to return a collection with all the users or all the reports. And you can ask for just one of these, or you can ask for all of them. So for instance, as we run this right here, it returns information about each data set, but also we can drill down and start looking at the dashboards and data flows and the data sets, and you can kind of see the properties, on each of these artifacts that you get back. Okay, so once again, the expand parameter can be pretty useful, and don't use what you don't need. Let's not do select star from table 1. Let's not say give me every single parameter expander if you don't need that. But quite often you'll need to see the users, or you want a quick report of reports and data sets. Now, next thing we're going to look at is the Power BI Admin API, cannot be used to create and manage workspace content. And what do I mean by that? If you're running as the admin API, you can't upload a PBX file to create a new data set. You can't do something like set credentials. However, with the Power BI Admin API, we have the ability to add and delete workspace members. So if you, have tenant level admin permissions, all you have to do is use the admin API to add yourself to a workspace as an admin, and then you go back to the user API to basically do all the, manipulation that you need. Now, here are the Power BI operations to manage workspace members. So we have a GetGroupsAsAdmin, so you can read them. And then we have 2 modification ones, to add a user as admin or delete a user as admin. And the one thing I'll point out is remember that you have to use a user account, not a service principal today, to call, add, or delete. And hopefully, that should be something that we'll address, before too long. What do they say, Rick? In the fullness of time? Okay, just kidding. Let's look at just a kind of tour through some of the other things that you can get. Let's say that you have a couple P SKUs and A SKUs. Well, we have a get capacities, which allows you to quickly list all the capacities, and their IDs and the users, who are admins of those capacities. If you have A SKUs, you can see whether they're paused or whether they're active. So that's pretty valuable. Let's say that you have some capacities and you want to figure out who the users are. So we also have a get capacity users as admin that returns different users. And notice that in the last slide, you could see who the admins were, but you can't see the other users that have been added in, with the assigned permissions. So this is what gives you the ability to kind of look at the users on one or more capacities. Okay, now let's say I want to look at my data sets. So once again, we have just the simple call get data sets in group as admin, and you can point to a workspace and it will basically return, information on each of the data sets that's in there. And you can kind of see things like when was it created, is it refreshable? Now, let's say that you discover, the data sets, but you want to go a little bit further. So we also have a get data sources. And the idea of get data sources, if you point to a data set and say, show me its data sources, it's going to bring back information, that will tell you, oh, we're connecting to SQL, and here's where the server lives, and here's the database name, or we're connecting to a web API, or we're connecting to SharePoint. Once again, just a quick way to get detailed information, about where your data sources are, for all your data sets and all your data flows. Okay, now we also have a get refreshables. The idea of a refreshable is that something that needs to be refreshed. Okay, go figure. But it includes, data sets built on import mode and data flows. And so the idea is that when you call get refreshables as admin, you'll get a list of everything that needs to be refreshed. You can see the last refresh time, and you can see whether the last refresh, was successful or not. Now, note that it does not give you the history, of particular refreshes. So today you will have to go use the user API, if you don't want to just see the last refresh, but you want to see the refresh history, over some period of time. Okay, going a little bit further, there's also get imports as admin. And the idea of an import is that every time you have a file that defines artifacts, so the obvious example would be a PBX file. And the idea is we have this PBX file and we import it to initially create a data set and or a report. And then later we publish the same PBX file, into the same workspace that effectively overwrites. So what get imports as admin will do is it will show you, each of your imports, show you, whether it's reports or data sets or paginated reports or data flows, and it will show you that information. So, it could add extra support if you're doing application lifecycle management. Okay. And just to end this section on discovery, there's a get reports as admin. I want to, basically look at all the different reports or dashboards. Typically when you call these, you dial it into, one or a small set of workspaces. And also there's get apps as admin. And I realized one thing I omitted from the slides is get pipelines as admin. Okay, so those were kind of just discovery APIs. Okay, now that we're at a section break, Rick, did we see any more questions? Let's see if we have.
No, we had just a follow-up from the previous question.
Okay.
Okay,
so just note to Ted, remind audience to send in text questions. Okay, let's start back up again. And so now what we want to look at, something that Rick's team has been hearing customer evidence and just really wanting this idea of enforcing governance, with the admin APIs. So let's start by answering this question. Who has access to what? Okay, maybe business users, won't articulate it, so elegantly, but I can walk up to a data set and call get dataset users as admin, and it will give me back, all the users that have access to that data set. Same thing with reports, get report users as admin, and as you might imagine, get dashboard users as admin, or get data flow users as admin. And all four of these will work, pretty similarly from a programming standpoint. So let's take a look at one of them, which is going to be the get report users as admin. So the first thing you're going to see is that you want to see, who has access to this report or this data set. And what's kind of hard is some people get access by being added as a member to the workspace. Other people were added, just by doing link sharing of that report. But this will give you kind of the combined, bottom line of which users have access to the report. Now, if I look down here, one of the things that I want to point out is that, it will have users. There's a user, there's a user. If I'm accessing this with a service principal, it will tell me that as well. But note that if you have an Azure AD group, it's not going to expand and, basically give you the detail of the 1,000 users that are in that group. So it will basically tell you what users, what service principals, and then what Active Directory groups, but it's going to kind of be to you to figure out, who's in that Azure AD group. Now, we want to look at some more of these admin API operations that allow us to kind of work with this governance theme. However, the next ones we're going to look at use this programming technique based on continuation tokens. Now, let's take a second to explain, the purpose of a continuation token, because once you understand it, it makes the code a lot easier to understand. So if you want to use this API that tells you, basically what artifacts are available to one particular user, let's say that user is really popular and has access to 500 workspaces and 100 artifacts in each workspace, you can't return all that data in a single HTTP request. So the whole idea of continuation tokens is when there's too much data to return in a single request, a continuation token, gives me this idea of stitching HTTP requests together so you can have a series of HTTP requests to get one logical set of data. Now, how do you call an API operation that returns a continuation token? We're going to see the details on the next slide, but the first call is made without passing a continuation token. The first call, you're going to pass something like the user ID or a workspace ID. Well, then if the call comes back, if it has a continuation token, that means there's more data. So any call that returns a continuation token means you got to make more calls. And also, when you make the next call, you pass the continuation token that you got from the previous request. And the idea is first call, get back a continuation token. Second call, get back a continuation token. Third call, no continuation token. That means we got all the data and the series of calls, is over. Okay, so now you kind of understand that conceptually. Here are the Power BI admin operations, that return continuation tokens. So let's look at the first one, get user artifact access as admin. Okay, so in this particular method, get user artifacts access as admin, we're going to pass a user ID. Notice that the user ID can either be, an email address or a user principal name, UPN, or it can be the GUID for your Azure AD user account, what's often called the graph ID. Now, the idea is we make the first call to get user artifacts access as admin. Then we look at this, response. So, as we can see, inside here, I'm going to capture that response. And then down below, we're going to look at the response and say, does it have a continuation token? If so, I need to fall inside this loop. Now, when we're inside the loop, we're going to call get user artifacts as many times as I get back a continuation token. But at some point, one of these calls will return without a continuation token and we fall out of the loop. Now, let's look at this exact same code in a second way. And that is you're making multiple calls, but yet it's one logical set of data. So what we need to do is find kind of some way to append the results of multiple calls, into a single data structure. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and create this collection variable, list artifact access entries. And then after the first call, what you can see is this object that you get back, it returns back this artifact access entities. And the idea is I'll throw those into the collection. And then each time we go through the loop and we make the call, it's going to add these inside as well. Okay, so that's basically how we get at one of these. Let's do this. Let's go back to my application for a second. And so this one that we want to look at is, I think it is in number 4 here. Okay, so let's say that here's the one that we want to call, and I have this very low-tech way of just kind of getting rid of things we don't need with comments. So now what we want to do is execute demo 4. And then one last thing that we'll do before I run this is we'll make sure that we've got Fiddler up and running. Okay, so let's go ahead and run this right here. And so, what we should be able to verify, is, here is that first call to artifact access. And it gives me back, this set of data, but it gives me a continuation token. And so what you'll see is we continue making calls through here. And what we should see is if I go to the second to last one, there's a continuation token. If I go to the very last one, all of a sudden, no more continuation token. Okay. So now that you've seen, how continuation tokens work, now let's look at some of the, other operations. So here, and this is something that we've heard a lot of customers, ask for, is what subscriptions does this user have? And so if you call, this method, get user subscriptions as admin, and once again, you pass the user ID as either a UPN or a graph ID, you'll be able to pull back a list, of all the subscriptions, that the current user has. Okay, and that's kind of what things look like when you see the result of subscriptions back. Now, a couple other things that we're going to look at right here is that what if you want to look at a workspace, that's got 200 different reports, and you want to figure out what's the junk we threw in here, that no one's used. So get unused artifacts as admin is going to return a list of all the artifacts in a workspace. So we target one workspace when we make this call, but now it's going to give me back, a set of artifacts that are 30 days or more since they've been accessed. Okay, currently we don't let you change that time, but you could look at the result and further trim and say, that's the list of everything that's 30 days, but then I want to put another filter so I can find things that are only, 60 or 90 days without being used. Okay, once again, something that we have to help you with governance. Now, the last two we're going to look at in this section are brand new. They're hot off the press. In fact, they're so hot off the press that we haven't yet wrapped them with the Power BI.NET SDK. So you can call these directly, but it's going to be another week or two, until we ship the new version of the Power BI.NET SDK, where we'll have kind of the wrappings to call this directly from C#. But the idea is you want to find out what reports users have just casually shared with the entire company. You want to see what reports your users have, basically made available publicly on the internet using the publish to web feature. Okay, so all well and good. Looks like we're good on time. So the next thing we're going to get into, is a very important topic, especially for those of you, who work in environments, where you have hundreds, or possibly thousands of workspaces, and you're trying to, manage that type of environment. So let's start by looking at GetGroupsAsAdmin. So I introduced GetGroups as admin early on, and one piece of advice is make use of the filter parameter for type. Typically it's type equals workspace and state equals active, and you can go further than that, and add filters on some of the other properties. Be mindful of extra data that you don't really need because you've used the expand filter. So expand, while in some cases is really helpful, can really bloat your response. Now, the reason I point these things out is that there is a definite limitation. You cannot call GetGroupsAsAdmin and expand every option and expect to get a single result back, for 5,000 workspaces. So what we have now is the call to GetGroupsAsAdmin, are limited to 500 calls per hour per tenant. And there's a lot of performance reasons that we need to, enforce that limitation. Also, calls to GetGroupsAsAdmin that take more than 30 seconds just get cut off. They're terminated. Okay, so while you think this is bad news, what you have to do is kind of change your mindset. So we have another API, the Workspace Scanner API, and this provides a far more scalable alternative to calling GetGroupsAsAdmin. And the reason is because it's an asynchronous API, it's non-blocking, and you can use it without the limitations that we've talked about with GetGroupsAsAdmin. Now, when we want to use the Scanner API, it's not just one operation you call and get a response back. It is a async API. So you'll call post workspace info to start an asynchronous job, to scan one or more workspaces. And then as the job is running, you can call get scan status to figure out if it's still running or if it's complete, And if it completed, did it complete successfully? Did it fail? And then at the very end, when you find that your scan operation has succeeded, you can call GetScanResult. Okay, let's look at the code. Well, before we look at the code, let's look at a high level. So the idea is that your application will start by calling post workspace info. And note that you can add some parameters and you'll pass a collection of workspaces. So note that you're not limited to one workspace. A lot of times you'll just have a single workspace, but if you had a business group, that had 6 or 7 different workspaces, you could add them all together and kind of scan them, all at once. But the idea is that this method will do nothing more than start the job and give you back a scan ID. And then what's going to happen is that when you get back to scan ID, you can call get scan status, and it will tell you status equals running. Okay, it's not ready yet. So now this is the classic case where you're in the back of the station wagon with your parents driving to that hill in the Poconos 10 hours away, and you keep saying, are we there yet? Are we there yet? So we scan, but sometime in the future, a scan will come back, and its status will be succeeded. And so at that point, we can call around and call get scan results. So now you've seen it at a high level. Let's kind of go through a piece of code. So first thing we got to do is figure out, what are the workspaces and what are their IDs that we want to perform the scan on. There is this really silly looking C# code right here. I would just kind of copy and paste this, but list of nullable GUID. Okay, great. But the idea is that, once you've created that parameter that has your workspace list, now we're going to call post workspace info. Then what we're going to do is we're going to take that scan status that we get back from calling post workspace info, and we're going to say if the scan status equals, and if it equals not started or running, it's not done yet. If it's succeeded or failed, it's done. So the idea is we keep saying, are we there yet? And here you can see that I have a thread.sleep for a second. So whatever interval makes the most sense for your scenario. But the idea is that after we fall out of that loop, we can basically take our result and do what we want with it. And also note that if scan status, equals failed, scan status has a .error, that you can use, which is going to, allow you to kind of pick up, what the error information. Note that if you include a workspace ID that does not exist, it doesn't fail. It just gives you back, one of the workspaces with a message inside of it saying this workspace does not exist. Now let's look at scan results. Now remember when we called GetGroupsAsAdmin, you had to use the expand parameter. When we call post workspace info and we get back to scan, it's automatically going to populate, the 4 primary artifacts, dashboards, data flows, data sets, and reports. Okay, now there's a lot of extra parameter passing that you can do with post workspace info. So let's look at a couple options. Step 1, let's say that we include the parameter get user artifacts equal true. What you're going to see then is the workspace at the top level will have a users collection, that will have your users, your apps, and your Azure AD groups that have been added as a member. In addition to that, it will also have a users collection in each artifact. So you can basically see, what users, have access to this particular report. And sometimes the user is not a member, of the workspace, yet still has permissions, to that report because someone, shared the report with them. Okay, next thing we're going to do is, let's say that we pass the parameter of lineage. First thing lineage is going to do is that if you have dashboards, without passing lineage equal true, the tiles do not get populated. So if we want populated tiles, we pass lineage. To me, probably more importantly, when we pass lineage, every data source and data flow is going to have references to the data sources they're using. What is the data set ID? And then one more thing that we have, is we'll point out upstream data flows. If a data set, is built on top of a data flow, you're going to get that association as well. Now, this is all well and good, as long as, you can, let's say you come down here and you look at a data source and you say, oh, I see that data source. You probably don't remember the GUID and what that means and what data source it points to. So now the second thing we want to do is, in addition to lineage, let's add data source details. Now, when we do that, first of all, look over here at the data that gets returned. Typically the top level node is Workspaces, but now we're going to pass another top level node as data source instances. And for any data source used in this workspace or any workspaces in the scan set, you're going to be able to quickly, see, what are the details of those data sources. So once again, it's just a great way on a workspace by workspace basis to kind of see where users are connecting to data. Okay, let's go a little bit further. So now let's say that when I scan a workspace, I want to know a little bit more about the tables and their schema within, one or more data sets. So when we say data set schema equals true, what we're going to find is that data sets will now have a tables collection that's populated with the table name, in the columns and the measures. Pretty neat stuff. How much would you pay for this product now? But wait, there's more. So for the last one we're going to look at is that if you say data set schema and you add in data set expressions, what you'll find is that the results for measures are going to have the actual DAX expression that you can look at. And for your tables that have Power Query, queries written in M code behind, they're going to be added inside there as well. Okay, so, lots of good stuff inside here. Now, there is one more section that we're going to cover before I hand over to Rick, and that is extracting, basically activity events. So inside the admin API, we have a GetActivityEvents operation. And the idea is that when you call this, you're going to the Power BI activity log, and you're basically pulling out information on, who viewed particular reports, who published a data set, that kind of stuff. Now, there are some limitations. When we call GetActivityEvents, you are limited to 200 requests per hour. And also, for each request, your time window, has to live within a 24-hour UTC time period. Now, let's look at the query string parameters that we're going to use. So first of all, you have to pass a start date time, and you can kind of see the format. So this is just passed as a query string parameter, as a string in single quotes. Okay, so 2022/01/27, you got the time inside there, and then there is the start date. And remember that you don't want these times to wrap around midnight because they have to be enclosed, with a single UTC day. And as you start using this, you'll find that getting things one day at a time is probably preferable. And that if you're in an environment with lots of activity, maybe trying to grab a whole day at once is way too much. So you'll start, grabbing things in 4-hour or 2-hour or 1-hour chunks. Okay, now there's also a filter parameter. So if you want to specify only give me view report, or create report activities, you can do that. And then last one, your favorite, we use continuation tokens. So luckily we've already talked about continuation tokens. So the idea with the continuation token is that we make a call, and rather than showing this, I think we got a little extra time here. So let's say I go back here, and now, back in our application, what we're going to do is we're going to come back here, and go to demo 06. Demo 06 is going to take, 2 different dates. Let's take Super Tuesday as well. Now, when we run this right here, what you're going to see here, if I can get over here, is that the very first request comes in. So this is the one that doesn't have the correlation token or the continuation token. And you can kind of see that we've started that. And now we go through this process, where the first request, returned a continuation token, and then we keep going. And one of the things that's really strange about that is that sometimes you get a response back that's empty. When I first use it, I would expect if I had 10 calls that each one would have a payload. But because of the way that, they've optimized access, they're looking at, different partitions, different time regions. So what you'll find, as you go through here, you might find that there's quite a few that don't return any data, but the idea is, when you get to the very last one, here's a continuation token. And now, here's some activity events, but no continuation token, so we fall out. Now, if I go back here and kind of take a look at this, and, what did we look at? We looked at activity events, so now you're kind of able to, build, something, that just returns a big piece of JSON, for your activity events. And this is some of our customers now, basically build Power BI desktop, reports on top of this data, so they can start, getting an idea about usage inside. Okay. One last thing I'll say about this demo, just in case, some of you want to play around with it. And that is that if I go back here, let's go back to, this particular demo. And so now what we want is to find Power BI Admin API demo, and let's go to exports. So here's this kind of file folder here. And so I'm just going to go ahead and delete all those. But the idea here is that, I have a bunch of different operations here. And if, we kind of undo all these and just let it run, what, the intent of the application, is just to run the operation. And, as it comes back, you can just see it's kind of filling up, the different data inside here. Some of the other things, that I played around with, as we're testing this, let's say I go back to this folder, and only because I'm a serious programming geek, when I take my folder, and open that up in Visual Studio Code. And, now that we've done that, let's look at the difference, between, Scan Workspaces, as user, and Scan Workspace, with the get user parameter. And so, here's a tool that will kind of quickly show me that, if I add get users in here, here's, how we're going to change the results that come back. So once again, the tool or this demo is just kind of made so that you can, quickly call these methods. I have just a little utility method that I take an object and pass it to it, and it stores it off as a JSON object. Okay, so at this point, I've now kind of been through all the demos that I wanted to show. And so what I wanted to make sure is that we give plenty of time for Rick here at the end. And Rick, can you kind of take us through this roadmap slide?
Absolutely. I was just mesmerized by the whirlwind of wonderful stuff that you've been going through right on time.
There is a recording. So I go through kind of fast, but the idea is that once this is recorded, you could watch the recording several times.
Okay, thanks, Ted. So I'll be going over this quickly. So while I do this, Ted, there's a question there. I think it's the same question, and so you might want to take a look and see if we can help.
Okay, we'll get the questions after you go through the roadmap slide.
Yep. So quickly here is a list of stuff that we are planning to do over the next 12 months or so. So just like what we've done in the past year, these are essentially all of the APIs that we've heard from feedback from you guys. So quickly, we're going to expand on the widely shared APIs that can show the exact number of users. So this is to address some of the concerns that admins have on oversharing. And then we want to have APIs that can do in bulk revoking and granting of permissions to workspaces and also artifacts. We also like to have admin APIs to delete artifacts. We have user APIs for deleting individual artifacts, but we don't have an API that can do that from an admin perspective. This is important because there's artifacts that are out of compliance scattered in some workspaces. So this would allow admins to perform compliance-related activities doing just that. And the next one is to kind of read and edit tenant settings. This is also another ask that we received. This is to help admins keep inventory of the numerous tenant settings that they have, and also maybe come up with a way to monitor the changes that are done to the tenant settings. And then we want to expand the service principal support to cover not just read only, which is what Ted covered today, but also read-write admin APIs. And last but not least, we want to have APIs to help with admins to better manage the refreshes, which has been a pain point for many admins. Keep in mind this is subject to change, and there's many competing priorities, but we do want to give this the attention that it needs. And also another point to raise is that this is certainly not set in stone. Let us know if you feel strongly anything else that you want that you're not seeing here. Please do let us know as well. So with that, I'll hand it back to Ted again.
Super. Okay, a couple questions here that we have in the bin. Let's go to our question slide. But let's go back to the first one. How do I get a list of all workspaces if the customer tenant contains 300,000 groups? And the idea is that that's what the Scanner API is for. You might need to call GetGroupsAsAdmin in a very kind of light way just to get the workspace IDs, and that you would have to page through. But once you have that list of IDs, you could take that to run a sequence of workspace scans. And I'd recommend scanning one workspace at a time. Certainly there are scenarios where you want to do multiple workspaces, but that using the Scanner API is the key to success in being able to get that back. And there's no time limit with Scanner API. We're not going to say, oh, you got to wait another 40 minutes till the hour's up before you do more calls. So once again, that's why we created that. One other question here that I see: the customer wants to select a subset of workspaces to trigger a scan for, either showing a full list with checkboxes or using filter criteria. This sounds to me like you have the API, but you have no built user interface for me to be able to invoke the API and get the information back. And that is the case. So you are, as a developer, responsible for writing something that, makes the call and then, does what it needs to do, with the results coming back. Hopefully that was the correct question that I answered. Okay, so at this point, I think we're all done for the day. And, as we went through, you got a quick introduction to the Power BI admin APIs. You kind of saw that just for figuring out what's in your environment in terms of workspaces and artifacts, the API gives you that functionality. Enforcing governance by, figuring out you have an artifact, who can access it? Or you have a user, what can they access? And also things like widely distributed reports, and unused, reports and data sets just get to be something that's helpful. We looked at scanning workspaces, and that is your, trick to getting workspace information, when your number of workspaces is very high. We looked at extracting events and, how to read data, out of the activity event log, assuming that after you pull it out, you're going to do something with it, possibly with Power BI Desktop, or a similar analysis tool. And then finally, Rick stepped us through the roadmap, and we kind of see where we're going, as far as the investments we're going to be making, over the next couple months. So I appreciate everyone coming and spending time with us today. And we look forward to Power BI Dev Camp next month, where we're going to cover Apple's data developing with service principal profiles. So thanks for attending.
Thank you so much. We're looking forward to that one. I just wanted to give a quick plug for our Power BI community at community.powerbi.com, where you can go catch up on all of the recordings and engage in the community, ask questions, look at the data stories gallery, all sorts of good stuff on there. So that's community.powerbi.com, as well as our YouTube channel. You can check out past recordings there as well. Ted, thank you so much for another great session. And Rick, thank you so much for joining us this month.
Thank you, Rick.
And laying out the roadmap and everything. Everyone else, thank you for joining and have a great day.